Hello, my name is Phil Easter, historian and writer from Baltimore, Maryland, also known as the Amazing Memory Man. This is YouTube story number 21 on my YouTube channel, Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. We're recording on Sunday, March 5th, 2023. Tonight, I will list historical events for the month of March. Every day, the month of March, historical events which I've memorized, and also a few special events in my own personal life. I will list at least one event for each day, and some days I will list two events. And so we start March 1st. That is a special day in the country of Wales, which is actually part of Great Britain. It's called St. David's Day. And also in the year 1790, here in the United States, the U.S. Census Bureau was founded. Every 10 years, they take the national census in years ending in zero, like we just had one 3 years ago in 2020. So March 1st, 1790, the U.S. Census was founded. For March 2nd, in 1962, a great individual achievement by a basketball player, Wilt Chamberlain scored exactly 100 points in an NBA basketball game, which is fantastic. Imagine that. One player scored 100 points exactly in a 48-minute basketball game. That is by far the record for one player. And, many teams don't even score 100 points sometime in a basketball game. And here he scored 100 points on March 2nd, 1962. What's really amazing about that is that was before the three-point shot. So even if you took a long shot in those days, a half-court shot or longer, it still only counted as 2 points. So that's even more remarkable before you had the three-point shot. Wilt Chamberlain, 100 points on March 2nd, 1962. But it's also a special day in my life. Just 7 years ago, in 2016, I made a phone call to a public radio station here in Baltimore to speak to a doctor who was talking about how he helped patients who have memory problems through illness or accident. And I was the last caller on the program that day, just a couple minutes before 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And I got to speak to him briefly, and he said to the hostess of the show, I'd like to talk to Phil sometime. So I'd left my name and phone number with the producer. And the next day, the Hopkins doctor called me back and said, we'd like to do a memory study on you, Mr. Easter. So I went over there a number of times in 2016 and 2017. And they wanted to do a report on someone with outstanding memory talent, some type of comparison with the people that they help, the patients that they help who have memory problems. So I'm very happy to have contributed to medical science research, all because I made a phone call to a radio station on March 2nd, 2016, 7 years ago. Very lucky that I did that. March 3rd. It may surprise many people to know that the Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem, although written by Francis Scott Key way back in 1814, did not become our official national anthem for more than 100 years. It was not until March 3rd, 1931, 117 years after it was written by Francis Scott Key, a Maryland lawyer, that the Congress, by act of Congress, it was declared our national anthem on that day in 1931. March 4th, for many years, was Presidential Inauguration Day. Starting with George Washington's second term in 1793, through the entire 19th century, and Franklin D. Roosevelt was the last president inaugurated on March 4th, and that was 1933, his first inauguration. And then sometime in the next 4 years, they changed it to January 20, as many of you know, which is what it's been since 1937, every 4 years, January 20, Presidential Inauguration Day. But it was March 4th for many years. But I'd also like to point out that George Washington's first inauguration was April 30th at one time, And here in Baltimore, there's a monument to George Washington, which has had the wrong date on it for his first inauguration all these years. It says 4 March 1789, when it should say 30 April. And I discovered that 38 years ago in 1985, and a major article appeared in the Evening Sun newspaper about my monumental error discovery, which I'm very proud of, to have discovered that mistake on a major historical monument here in Baltimore, the George Washington Monument. But again, March 4th was Inauguration Day from his second term all the way through 1933, Roosevelt's first term. Now, the exception, of course, when a president has died in office, which has happened 8 times, and when Richard Nixon resigned on August 9, 1974, obviously the vice president has to become president immediately. But we're talking about scheduled inauguration days, as it is January 20th now, but it was March 4th for many years, which meant it was a better part of 4 months after a November election, a new president could take office, if indeed a new president was elected. That's a lot longer than just 2.5 months, the way it is now. On March 5th, way back in the year 1770, an event leading up to the American Revolution, the Boston Massacre, as it was called, when 5 American colonists were shot dead by British soldiers in Boston. The American colonists were throwing snowballs at them, and the British soldiers fired back and killed 5 Americans on March 5th, 1770. March 6th, in 1836, that was the famous battle in the state of Texas known as the Alamo. There were about 200 men, mostly American citizens, who were actually fighting for the independence of Texas from Mexico. A Mexican army of about 3,000 men were attacking the Alamo for 13 days. And finally, on March 6th, the defenders were overcome and all the men were killed, including a very famous man named Davy Crockett. He was a famous American frontiersman from the state of Tennessee originally. He served in Congress for several years, and he was one of those fighting against the Mexicans who died at the Alamo on March 6, 1836. On March 7th, in 1945, an event towards the end of World War II, American soldiers crossed the bridge at Remagen, and thus began the final push towards defeating Germany. It was 2 months later, on May 7th, that Germany officially surrendered. But again, on March 7th, 1945, many American soldiers crossed a bridge called Remagen. On March 8th, 1971, one of the most famous heavyweight boxing matches of all time took place at New York's Madison Square Garden, the first of 3 times that Joe Frazier and Muhammad Ali fought each other for the World Heavyweight Championship. And what was really interesting at that point was Ali and Frazier had never lost a professional fight at that point. So it was a very big media hype event on that Monday, March 8th, 1971. And Joe Frazier at one point knocked Muhammad Ali down to the mat. He did not knock him out. Ali was able to get up in less than 10 seconds, so the fight went to distance, but Frazier did win on points. But here's an odd thing that happened after that. Would you believe Joe Frazier, winning the fight according to boxing rules, was still so hurt by Ali that he had to go to the hospital for the better part of 2 days. It does sound funny that not the loser, but the winner of that fight ended up going to the hospital. That just shows you how hard Ali punched as well. A few years later, Ali and Frazier would fight 2 more times, Ali winning both times. But Joe Frazier did win the first time they met on March 8, 1971. On March 9th, 1862, an important event in Civil War history and in world naval history, really, the first time 2 ironclad ships fought one another. The Monitor of the Union and the Merrimack of the Confederate States fought near Hampton Roads, Virginia, and it was pretty much a stalemate. Both ships retreated after they fired on one another for a while, but the first time that naval ships were ironclad. And that, of course, Most ships were still wooden at the time, and Navy ships, but that was the very first time ironclad ships ever fought in combat. March 10th, that was the day in 2020 towards the World Health Organization declaring coronavirus a world pandemic. Coronavirus, of course, started in 2019 in China. The first reported case in America was on January 20th, 2020, and then a few months later, March 10th, declared a world pandemic. March 11th, in 2004, a terrorist attack in Spain, in Madrid, Spain, where 191 people were killed by bombs set at a train station early that morning. March 11th, 2004, that terrible terrorist attack in Madrid. March 12th is a day where the Girl Scouts, I think, were founded back in 1912, on March 12th. March 13th, there's a day in my personal life, a very sad day. My father died on March 13th, 1990. His name was Philip Ewing Easter, and he died 3 months before he would have turned 70. He was born June 12th, 1920, and died March 13th, 1990, 69 years and 9 months old, just 3 months short of 70. March 14th, in 1879, Albert Einstein was born in Germany, a great scientist who became so important in the 20th century. And as a matter of fact, he came to the United States. He left Germany in the 1930s, about the time Hitler and the Nazis took over Germany. He came to the United States, and he would teach at Princeton University for some years. Albert Einstein, born March 14th, 1879. March 15th, well, we go way back for this date, more than 2,000 years ago. The great Roman soldier and statesman, Julius Caesar, was murdered on March 15th, 44 BC. That day, he went to the Capitol at about noon, expecting to meet some of the senators, and some people think that he was hoping to be named emperor officially. He already had a lot of power, virtually a dictator, but 7 men stabbed him a number of times, including Brutus. He thought Brutus was his friend, and of course, according to Shakespeare, Julius Caesar's last words were, "Et tu, Brute," and "you too, Brutus." He was murdered that day, the great Roman leader, Julius Caesar, March 15th, 44 BC. March 16th was the birthday of the 4th American president, James Madison, born March 16th, 1751. He was our 4th president, and during the Second War of Great Britain, the War of 1812, which actually lasted until 1815, he was president during that time, when Francis Scott Key wrote the Star-Spangled Banner as the defenders of Fort McHenry fought off the British ships attacking Fort McHenry. March 17th, of course, as almost everyone knows, is considered St. Patrick's Day, the patron saint of Ireland, back in the 6th century AD. But this might be interesting that many people perhaps don't know that St. Patrick was actually not born in Ireland. He was born in Wales. I mentioned earlier about Wales, about St. David's Day being March 1st, but yeah, St. Patrick was actually born in Wales, but he was taken to Ireland as a captive by Irish pirates and made a slave for several years. He escaped around age 20 or 21 and got a boat back to Wales. He became a priest and then later returned to Ireland and converted many people to Christianity. But we celebrate March 17th as St. Patrick's Day. March 18th is sometimes called St. Joseph's Day, another not as well-known date of the Christian calendar, but is sometimes called St. Joseph's Day. March 19th, in 1936, was born Ursula Andress, a great actress who became famous during the 1960s and 70s, and her first big movie was in 1962. She was in the first James Bond movie ever made, called Dr. No, starring Sean Connery, of course, as James Bond. As you know, many actors have played James Bond over the years, but Sean Connery made the first 4 James Bond movies, and I think he was still really the best actor as James Bond. But his first big female star co-starring with him in that first James Bond movie was Ursula Andress. March 20th in 1969. That was the day that Beatle John Lennon married Yoko Ono in Montreal, Canada. John Lennon and Yoko were married on that day, March 20, 1969. March 21st, way back in the year 1685, the great musical composer Johann Sebastian Bach was born March 21st, 1685. On March 22nd, in 1952, sportscaster Bob Costas was born. He became well known as an NBC sportscaster for many years, and he covered a number of Olympic Games. And also, he's a big New York Yankees baseball fan. Bob Costas, March 22nd, 1952. March 23rd, in 1929, Roger Bannister was born in England. He became famous as a young medical student in 1954 when he became the first person to ever run 1 mile in under 4 minutes. A tremendous achievement, not just in track and field history, but in science history. Many doctors said it could never be done. The human body could not just run a mile in under 4 minutes. Well, it's ironic in a way that 25-year-old Roger Bannister at that time, a medical student at Oxford University, became the first person to do it. He became a great neurologist in Great Britain, one of the best doctors of neurology Britain has ever had. Roger Bannister, born March 23rd, 1929. March 24th, in 1984, I went up to New York City to see the World Cross Country Championships that year. It was a race in New York City just for elite runners. I should point out, it actually was at the Meadowlands, which is technically New Jersey, that's right, but it's very close to New York City. It's where the New York football teams play football, the Giants and the Jets. And so these top runners, both men's and women's races, had their championships at the Meadowlands. But New York City was the headquarters for people with press credentials and the athletes and coaches. March 25th, 1947. Famous singer Reggie Dwight was born in England. What? You're not familiar with Reggie Dwight? Oh, excuse me. Perhaps the name Elton John is more familiar to you. That's right. His real name is Reggie Dwight. But Elton John was born that day in 1947, March 25th. And I'm happy to say I saw him in concert once at the Baltimore Civic Center back on September 16th, 1980. 43 years ago, I saw Elton John in concert here in Baltimore. March 26th, in 1979, that was the day that the peace treaty was signed between Israel and Egypt. A very important event because for so many years those countries have been enemies, and Israel fought a series of wars against Egypt and some other Arab countries also. But President Jimmy Carter was very important to help arrange that peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, signed on March 26, 1979. March 27th, in 1942, English actor Michael York was born. And I've seen several of his movies. Michael York, born in March 27th, 1942. Now, March 28th, in 1969, former President Dwight Eisenhower died at age 78. He was president from 1953 to 1961, but also he was one of the top American generals in World War II, one of the major architects of the famous D-Day invasion, which took place on June 6, 1944. He was one of the few men ever to be given 5 stars. He retired a 5-star general and then became president of the United States, America's 34th president. But something else happened the day he died in my own personal life, which was actually interesting for me. On that day, I was a junior in high school, and in a track meet, out of 6 runners in the 1 mile race, I was only in 4th place after 3 laps, with 1 lap to go. And in that final quarter mile, I ran and passed all 3 runners ahead of me, and I won the race. I ran many races in my track career, both high school and after that, and cross country and road races. I did not win too many races, but that was the first race I ever did win. It was very satisfying, of course, and I was very happy about that. But even then, at age 16, I'd studied history better than many 16-year-olds, and I knew something about Eisenhower, and I was sad to know that he died that day. But I'm just pointing out that very same day happened to be a good day for me. I won a 1 mile race in a high school track meet on March 28, 1969. March 29th, 1982, never did I watch an Academy Awards ceremony on TV with greater pleasure, because at the end of the night, a movie I'd seen 1 month before already for the first time, and I would see it many more times, the beautiful British-made film Chariots of Fire won 4 Academy Awards that night, including Best Picture of 1981. So I was very happy that March 29th, 1982, that Chariots of Fire, which I'd already seen 1 time, won the award for Best Picture of the year before. As you know, the Academy Awards, they always award the movies for the year before. So it's considered Best Picture of 1981, but just so you know, the ceremony was March 29th, 1982. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan was shot in Washington, D.C. by a man named John Hinckley, some young man who was obsessed with actress Jodie Foster, and in his mind, his deranged mind, he thought he could impress her by shooting the President of the United States. But thank goodness Ronald Reagan survived. He was shot, and 3 other men were shot too. They all survived, but that was just lucky, because so many times, people are shot at close range, they die. It was very fortunate President Reagan survived. He had only been president for two months at that point, and indeed he went on to win a second term in 1984 and served 8 full years as president. But that terrible event happened March 30th, 1981. March 31st, the last day of the month, 2 famous sports people have died that day. Way back in 1931, the great college football coach Knute Rockne, famous for coaching Notre Dame in the 1920s and early 30s, was unfortunately killed in a plane crash, only 40-some years old. And then in 1980, one of America's greatest Olympic champions, Jesse Owens, who won 4 gold medals at the famous Berlin Olympics in 1936, he died at age 66 on March 31st, 1980. I'm happy to say and proud to say that I once met Jesse Owens here in Baltimore 2 years before, on July 13th, 1978. I met him when he came to Baltimore to appear at a children's track meet and do some publicity work. He did a lot of publicity type things throughout his life, advertising. But Jesse Owens, winner of 4 gold medals at the Berlin Olympics in 1936, died on March 31st, 1980. So there's the month of March, many events I have memorized and sharing with you today. This is Phil Easter, the Amazing Memory Man. We'll see you next time, another story on another subject. Thank you and good night.